name, the company you work for, and where you're located. We'll run through this pretty quick.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Felicia Hines. I'm with Sarah Jobs, and I am the Director of Employment Services, and we're located in Houston, Texas.
All right. Thank you, Felicia. Jaime?
My name is Jaime Villescas. I own Alignment Specialist LLC. We're an automotive shop, Midland, Texas.
Yep, you guys are in Midland. Danielle?
Hey, good morning. Danielle Parks with Truist Bank and in commercial banking, and I'm here in Houston.
All right. Thank you all very much. So this topic is one that we resurrected from a few years ago, and we haven't really talked about it in a while. We've had a lot of other things that our participants have been interested in talking about, but it's really something that we all felt at the end of the year when we were talking about topics for 2023 that we really wanted to revisit, because certainly as we're addressing the challenges that we're all facing, just with the volatility in the market and continuing to reemerge from the economic downturn as it relates to related to COVID shutdowns, as we're seemingly having to come across challenges that in some cases we've never seen before. Really, it's very important, this notion of revisiting what leadership really means and what constitutes good leadership, and then coupling that with effective management is something that we felt is really important to talk about as we move forward. It's a real interesting topic. We've done this for several years. You're going to get a lot of different information, different perspectives on this. But what I'd like to start off with is I would like to pose it to the panel. Well, I want to talk about leadership and define leadership. Then I want to talk about management. And then we're going to talk about some characteristics of managers and leaders. What constitutes good leadership, what constitutes good management, and conversely, which constitutes bad leadership, what constitutes bad management, and pulling these all together because we need both. If our organizations are going to succeed, it doesn't necessarily mean that we as individuals need to be great leaders and great managers. It means that our organizations need to include great leadership and great management. So recognizing who we are as business leaders, what we're better at, and where we can bolster areas that we have weaknesses is extremely important. So what I'd like to start off with first is the definition of leadership. And I'm starting off with this one first because the definition of leadership can go in many different directions. It can mean many different things to many different people. It's a lot more vague or nebulous in nature, because really that's what leadership is. But how would we define, I'll pose it to the panelists, how would we define leadership? What do we think constitutes leadership? Now, Jaime, you've heard the definition, so don't give it away too quick.
I would just I just think of adjectives. So empowerment as opposed to doing.
Yes.
So developing, empowerment, vision setting, high expectations, clearing obstacles, consistency in messaging. Okay.
I like all of those. First and foremost, you're talking about vision. You're talking about creating the general direction that people are heading. You talked about empowering, being inspirational. So a lot of those kind of I guess call them big picture feel good type things go into the definition of leadership. So those are all good. And what you're going to find is that the definition that I have, all of these things are going to fit into it. It's real funny how this works out, such a great definition. But those are all great things. Who else? Who wants to throw something else in?
Influence.
Influence. Yep. You're going to hear that word again over the course of this conversation. Anybody else? Rand or Felicia, you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, probably jump on what Danielle said about vision, and what I think it makes a great leader, which I struggle with sometimes, is the translation of that vision to the team.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about that and how really effective leadership means to create these visions, to create these other things, and basically create the environment that we want to work in, and then disseminating that through the organization. So that's important. We just had a comment that came in that mentioned inspiring others, and absolutely, I think that's a really huge part of it. So I'll go ahead and share the definition that I found, and this is something that over the years that we've done this topic, and we've found definitions and used them, but some of them were good, some of them weren't so good. But this is the definition that I think really encompasses leadership, and it hits all the points that we just discussed. And actually, it's ironic that all the other roundtables that we've done so far this month, when I ask that question, everybody hits on these same things, and I think it all gets encompassed into this definition. So the definition of leadership that we like is: leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a greater good. So let's think about that for a second. So it's a process of social influence. So that's where you get into the notion of influence. What do great leaders do? Great leaders influence people. When we think about our business transactions are social interactions. How we interact with employees, how we interact with vendors, how we interact with customers and clients. They're social interactions that lead to us conducting business. So it's really an influence of social interactions, or a social influence. Now, that influence can be good influence, and influence can be bad influence. The purpose of this definition is not necessarily to say, okay, well, this is good leadership and this is not so good leadership. The purpose of the definition is really what leadership is. So it's a process of influence. And anybody that you can think of that is a really great leader, what were they really good at doing? It was influencing other people, and basically influencing interactions, social interactions between other people. So the next part of that is maximizing the efforts of others. So we're taking everybody, and this is where you get into the vision and leading people towards a vision, and maximizing those efforts to achieving the vision, achieving the goal. It's that inspirational part of it. And then lastly, towards the achievement of the greater good. And so what is the greater good? Well, the greater good is what do we want to get out of what we're doing? So if it's a political leadership, well, the greater good is the betterment of the society. If it is business leadership, the greater good is allowing the business to achieve its goals and ultimately what it wants to be. If it's leadership in sports and athletics, and we see that all the time, well, it's the greater good is the achievement of whatever goals that they set, or basically winning the championship. So that is defined as the greater good. And the important word, I think, there's also the achievement. It's achieving a good. It's not just meeting a goal. It's an achievement, arriving at some type of achievement. One thing, though, that I do want to mention is that this greater good can be a very subjective thing. Actually, a lot of these things in this definition can be very, very subjective and defined in a lot of different ways. So the greater good could be something that we all do not consider as something good. You have plenty of great leaders through history that were very effective and great leaders. They led people to things that are traditionally frowned upon. So good leadership can still be defined as someone that is helping a group of people, a group of individuals achieve a greater good that we don't necessarily consider as something good. So any comments from the group on that definition? Those of you especially that have heard it from the first time, anything you'd like to add to that? Okay, good. I like that. Everybody's in agreement. So the next thing I want to do is define management. What is management? What do we think management is? We're not going to spend too much time on this because Merriam-Webster helps us define management. But what do we think management? What is our definition of management?
Holding people accountable.
Holding people accountable. That's part of it. What else? One more.
Ensuring processes and procedures are followed.
Yep. Ensuring process and procedures are followed. Jaime, you're going to share something?
Well, I was going to share that I look at management kind of in the, I guess, the sense of how the word is spelled, and what it says in Spanish is manejar, like drive. Manage, manejar, like driving. You drive like a group, I guess. You know, you like when you're driving a car, for example, you have the, I guess, the ability to steer that car into a direction that you want it to, and that's what you manage. Like you steer the company or the group or the team in a direction that you want to.
Yeah, it's a function of control. You're controlling that vehicle. So that's really, I mean, you just look it up in the dictionary. I mean, what is the definition of management? Management is defined as the control or organization of something. That is really straightforward. The definition of leadership is very vague, can mean a lot of different things. The definition of management, that is pretty cut and dry. The process of the control or organization of something. So if you think about it, and we used the car example in previous roundtables, where we said that if you think about leadership and management, that management is the actual act of driving the car. How fast are you going? What direction are you going in? But your leadership is planning the trip and defining the overall route that you can take. Management is following the route. Leadership is defining the route that you're going to take, what you're going to do, where you're going to travel. It's all that stuff that is again, nebulous. It could be anything. We can go anywhere. We can do anything. We can do different things. We can change plans. We can do all of these different things if we're taking this trip. But the thing that stays constant and defined is basically how we drive our car. We use a steering wheel, we use a brake pedal, we use the accelerator pedal. We adhere to the traffic laws. We stay on the road, so to speak. We may be going on a road. Well, sometimes we may go off road, but we're going generally in a place where the vehicle can go, but in which direction ultimately that takes is the leadership aspect of it. So what I'd like to do, moving to the next part of this, is I want to talk a little bit about what constitutes or what are some characteristics of leaders, and what are some characteristics of managers that we can discuss and we can debate on a little bit. So I'll preface this by saying this is a characteristic of a manager. This is a characteristic of a leader. So the first characteristic is a manager makes decisions, and a leader facilitates decision making. So the way we want to think about this is that the leader creates the environment. That's what we do with leadership. We create the vision. We create the motivation to attain that vision. We influence people to be motivated to attain that vision. We basically create the environment within which management exists. And then it's up to management to make the very specific decisions where they can exhibit the exact control that they need to in order to steer the organization physically in the direction that it needs to go. Characteristic of a manager is they plan around constraints. Characteristic of a leader is they create direction. So again, going back to what I was saying before, a manager has short-term vision. Obviously, short-term vision is you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to follow this process in the short term so we can get it done, so we can accomplish our goals. A leader creates long-term vision. That's the overall vision. That's where the organization needs to go and what it needs to be and what it needs to be all about. I think another thing to think about with this is that that managers are typically focused on more shorter term goals. We do this, we're going to get this result. Leadership is more focused on longer term goals, where if we do this enough, we're going to achieve this, because typically your visions are a lot more difficult to achieve, obviously, than performing a set of tasks. So another thing, aspects or characteristics of managers and leaders is a manager appeals to the head. Obviously, a leader appeals to the heart. So what the leaders do, typically leadership involves a lot more emotion than management does. Because again, as you're going through and trying to influence people, that influence evokes emotion. Creating a vision evokes emotion. I mean, again, going back and thinking about great leaders is either they were emotional and people bought into that, or what they did or what they said or how they inspired created emotion, because that was the driving factor towards achieving the vision that they wanted to achieve. So that typically appeals more to the heart. Management, you're trying to follow a process that more appeals to the head and the mind, because you're thinking about how do I follow this? How do I do this? These are the tasks that I need to perform and I need to be successful with. Another characteristic of leaders and managers is managers are reactive, leaders are proactive. So let's think about that for a little bit. I mean, how typically is a leader reactive? I mean, a manager reactive? I'll pose that question to the group. I mean, how typically is a manager reacting to things, or how do we, or people that we work with that are primarily managers, how do we react with things?
First phrase that comes to mind is no call, no show.
Yeah, that's a reaction. Somebody showed up late to work, and I can't. I have to react to that situation. Danielle, you have something you want to share?
Yeah, really more broadly along the lines of what Rand said is like any disruption in day-to-day business operations that you have to address is going to cause a reactive response.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that issues that come up within a business certainly require management to get out of. I mean, you have to think about leadership establishes general direction. It establishes core values. It establishes the greater good, the why of what we're doing, why we're doing this, and why it's special what we're doing, and that stays fairly constant. We always talk about company cultures and company core values. Those stay constant. Those don't change. Those are not reactionary, but the specific situations that we deal with in a business, those are reactionary. But those situations, they don't necessarily require the great leader. They require a good manager to manage the situation and manage through the situation. So that's a really great point, and it's something that that we didn't touch on the last time we did this topic. That really, that's a great reactive part of management, is when things go wrong, and it's a very good illustration of why we need both in our organizations. We need that great vision, we need that motivation, we need that inspiration, but when there are very specific things that occur, and there have to be very specific steps to be taken to fix that, we need people also in the organization that can guide us through that. So that is that it's so critical, again, that you have both. I think another oh, go ahead, Danielle.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, can I just share an insight? Is gosh, I just love our conversations. Is I would say that oftentimes in company culture, when you're in leadership or you have direct reports, it's frowned upon. Oftentimes you'll hear, "Are you a manager? Are you a leader?" Really saying like, don't just be a manager, evolve into being a leader. But honestly, I think that most of us, we need to wear those two hats every day. And while, leadership is consistency with the long game, management is, helping to problem solve and evolve and keep business going day to day. And I love the idea that we can embrace both aspects, but just being very cognizant and intentional about what we're doing, like in our day to day, and if one is being neglected in favor of the other. I think oftentimes people can get very immersed in the management because you get very busy, but you're really neglecting the leadership, which is going to create a vision of long-term success and employee development. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways. And really, honestly, leadership is put on a pedestal. I mean, how many leadership conferences do you go to? How many leadership seminars do you go to? How many management conferences are there? I mean, when's the last time you heard, hey, we're going to the management conference? Or, management tends to be frowned upon. And it's like, are you a manager? Okay, you're way down here. Are you a leader? Oh, you're up on the pedestal. But you're exactly right. It requires both. And we'll touch on this in a little bit, because I do want to revisit this and spend some time on it. But it's the notion of how much management do you need for the position that you're in, and how much leadership do you need for the position that you're in. I think as you move up in an organization, you're at a higher level, you have more of a broader influence in the organization. I think leadership is a lot more important than management. But as you're lower in the organization and you don't have that broad scope of influence, then management is more important. If I am a entry-level manager, I'm a middle manager, and I have a team of 5 people where my scope is very small. If I'm the CEO and I have hundreds of people that I'm ultimately responsible for, my scope of influence, my sphere of influence is very, very large. And so it becomes more important to manage that sphere of influence than it does to try to specifically manage the hundreds of people that are underneath me. That's why we have a hierarchy that moves, that goes down.
I was going to add also another difference is between leadership and management is the amount of responsibility, not only that you have, but the amount of responsibility that you're willing to take on.
Well, yeah, and I think that leadership involves a lot more responsibility, because part of what you do as a leader is you are influencing people, and so you have a responsibility as you're influencing people to influence people correctly. Basically, I mean, to influence people to achieve a vision, or to create a good vision, and create a vision that's worth achieving. So I think that responsibility is extremely important, because again, when you're on the leadership side, that sphere of influence is much greater than it is when you get down to just managing small teams. So those are I think those are great points, but yeah, Danielle, I mean, we have to have both. And but the thing is that not all great managers are great leaders. And definitely not all great leaders are great managers. I think you find more people that are great leaders, but they're really terrible managers, than you find, really terrible managers that are great. Well, you find great, great managers that are, also really great leaders. Again, you look at a lot of the idea people, the inspirational people. They're not necessarily good at running a business. And there are a lot of examples of that out there, but where they're highly successful is they surround themselves by people that are good at running a business, that people that are good at the nuts and bolts and making sure that the wheels turn and that the wheels keep turning. And so that's so important. So it's not necessarily for us to say, okay, well, I have to be a great leader and a great manager. I just have to make sure that I've got great management and great leadership in my organization, and not necessarily frown upon one or the other. I have to have an organization of leaders. Well, that's good, and you want people to exhibit leadership, but you also have to have people that are really good at managing things in order to be successful. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? So an individual may have developed a skill set over the course of their life, and some of it may be innate, and some of it just may be their past experiences where they may be more favorable to being in a leadership position versus a management position. But I found that most people are very malleable, and with the intention and the right coaching and taking ownership of your education, that you can transition from a management style to a leadership style. And kind of thinking around the transition from an individual that's a manager, so they're in the day-to-day, that maybe they're a manager and a leader and a producer, but then they're transitioning to a leadership role where they're going to have more direct reports, say triple your direct reports. That is a complete shift in the skill set needed and the mindset. And I just would love to hear your perspective on an individual who, thank you for sharing that podcast, on if your experience with individuals that needed to shift from being in that producer manager role to really being a full-on leader with a larger team. So,
well, I would like to preface that also. Well, we'll preface what the rest of our panelists want to share with the notion of I think it depends. A lot of it depends on the context and the context of the situation. So I agree that I think again you're right. As you move up in an organization, it becomes more important to learn leadership skills and to learn how to motivate people and learn how to manage that sphere of influence that you have. And I do think that those are certainly skills that can be developed. I mean, I would say, personal experiences is that, and I think all of us can say this, and we were all starting off and we had our first positions of authority. In some cases, now some people are just naturally born with it and it's easy, but others, we have to learn and develop it over time. But how many people were put in a position of authority? And this is going all the way back to middle school sports or whatever it was, but trying to get people to do things, but they didn't want to do them, or you got pushback from them. I mean, how many of us have experienced that? So I see hands raised. Who wants to share what they did to get over that? Rand, you raised your hand, so you're going to get picked on.
Well, it's funny because you were talking about back in the day, and I remember I was maybe 21 or 22, and I was working out at the Grand Canyon, and there was they pushed me up to assistant manager. They gave me the keys, and they were like, "All right, you got to close the restaurant down up here a few days a week." And I had gone from like busser to server to manager, and I just remember how horrible I was at holding people accountable. And it was really difficult to me, especially people that were, I was 22, there was people in their 40s and 50s that were working there that I just really struggled with that. And I don't necessarily think I have a really good example of how I overcame that.
Well, I think you overcome it because I'll share a personal example as well. Is I ran into the same types of things. It was hard to get people to do what you ask them to do, and when you're younger and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I get people to listen? But what I found is that creating the example made it a lot easier to exhibit influence. So if I was the one that was working the hardest, or I was the one that was typifying what needed to be done, then that made it a lot easier to tell people, okay, well, you need to do this, because they saw things being done and things being done the right way, and they saw what was going on, and it created a notion within them to say, okay, well, I want to do this too, or I see the success that you're having. I want to be able to have that success as well. What do I need to do? Show me. And then at that point in time, it started becoming a lot easier to get people to do what needs to be done. And I think another aspect of that is confidence. I think when we're first getting started, when we're first put in positions of responsibility, that we don't have a lot of confidence because we haven't done it before. But the more we get through it, the more we learn how to influence, the more success that we have, the more confidence that we build. And the more confident we are, the more people are going to listen to us and therefore follow us, whether we're exhibiting leadership qualities or management qualities. I mean, I can be a micromanager and I can exhibit no leadership qualities, but I'm a good manager, but I manage very confidently. People are going to listen to me. If they feel that I'm unsure about what needs to be done, or they hear from me, I don't know, or I even don't know how to perform the task, then it's going to make it much easier or much more difficult for me to actually get them to do what I want them to do.
You know, I would add that I feel like, you know, obviously leadership is such an evolution, and sometimes it feels like it's a day-to-day trial and error. But I feel like I had tried to pull the lever of kind of threatening the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like, you got to do your job. You're lucky to be here because you got to put food on the table. That goes nowhere with inspiring an individual. I feel as if an employee that feels appreciated will go above and beyond to do what's expected of them and to really seeing them as the whole person. Now, an individual still has to show up, and you can have a level of compassion that goes beyond holding somebody accountable. So you have to manage to that. But I think a person that feels seen and appreciated will do more and be more committed to the culture. So that has been my personal evolution of, as opposed to laying down the law and demanding respect, really, you know, trying to ensure that everyone is engaged and appreciated. And I love your example of building credibility because you are the example of what needs to be done. It's so challenging to have an individual that you are being managed by, where you don't necessarily feel like that they are aligning themselves and their behaviors to what their expectations of you are.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, you know, another aspect of that is relatability. If you are in a completely different place than the people that you're trying to directly manage, then that's going to be very difficult for you, because you can't find that common ground. And if you can't find that common ground, or you can't find ways to be relatable, it's very difficult to build that respect as a manager or a leader. And so I think that notion of relatability is so important. I mean, how many people want to follow a manager or listen to a manager that says, "Hey, I've done your job. I know what you're going through. I know that this is difficult, but here's how you work through this." Other than saying, "Hey, don't screw it up or you're going to get fired." Basically, I mean, sometimes people need to hear that, and sometimes that is motivating. But I think it's a temporary motivation. I think it's really all about finding that ability to relate to people and inspire people and get the buy-in. Now, one thing I will say is that if you have an organization that is so well led that everybody is bought in and everybody wants to strive to achieve the goals of the organization, that may mask some bad management because the inspiration's already done. So the managers aren't necessarily needing to inspire. The leadership has already done that. The managers just do what they're going to do. And that may be a good thing. That may be a bad thing. But I think that these overly inspirational companies, or people are so excited just about being a part of what these companies are doing, because leadership has done such a good job of building up that brand and building up that vision, getting people, influencing people to follow that you can certainly mask bad management. But one thing that I will say is that what we also have to realize is that this is all, again, these are all social interactions. And what are social interactions? A lot of social interactions are built upon at least some form of respect, or in some cases, some form of necessity. And bad managers that want to rule with an iron fist, they're going to rule, basically. They're going to manage with that notion of necessity. You have to do this or you're going to lose your job, or you have to do this or something bad is going to happen. You have to, or even bad leaders do that with this notion of necessity. You have to follow me or something bad is going to happen to you. And at the end of the day, I mean, that can be effective. But I think as we evolve as a society, I think it makes it much more difficult to manage an organization with that notion of fear than it was previously. I think it's more of a notion of buy-in, getting everybody on the same page, finding that common ground that everybody can stand on, and then using that as a basis for how you manage and subsequently how you lead. So I'd like to pose a question to the group, because this segued into it. So we'll get a little off topic and then we'll get back on topic. But the question that I want to ask is, what do our panelists believe? Do we believe that anybody can be a leader? I see some head shaking. Do we believe that anybody can become a leader?
I think it goes back to what Danielle said about flexing. And so not only as a leader, in my mind, or just anybody within an organization, you can flex from leadership to management to subordinate at any given time. And as you do that, as you flex into subordinates, you create leaders out of anyone within an organization. And then, flexing in and out of management is a little bit easier to do, but, ensuring that you're empowering those around you by, like you mentioned, Maurice, and I think about middle school sports, like you mentioned, going above and beyond and doing whatever it takes to get things done. Sometimes that includes becoming, allowing others to lead the way, because you just don't know as much as they do.
Well, I think that's right. And I think that my answer to the question is, I think anybody can be a leader, because I think anybody can exhibit leadership qualities. And let me explain what I mean with that. Is, it doesn't matter where you are in an organization. It can be the highest of the high or the lowest of the low, but you can still exhibit, being the lowest of the low, you can still exhibit leadership qualities. And you can exhibit leadership qualities by setting the example, by buying in to the vision of the organization and where the organization is going, and by contributing as much as possible to the success of that organization. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO or you're the janitor still plays an extremely important role. And that janitor can be a leader, because that janitor can influence people around him or her by the example that they set and how they do their job. I mean, how many people do we see at the lower ends of the organizational chart that are they complain about their jobs? They go out and they take a smoke break, and they're talking trash about the organization and how much they dislike what management is doing and the direction of things and all that good stuff. How often do we see that happening? Well, that is actually exhibiting negative leadership qualities, because you are influencing people. And now, if that same person is going through and saying, okay, well, yeah, we don't necessarily agree with this, but the organization's headed in the right direction, and I like this, and this is why I'm going to do the best job that I can. Well, then you're influencing people as well. You may have no leadership or management responsibility, but you are exhibiting leadership qualities by your ability to influence those around you. So that's why I think that basically anybody can be a leader. Now, go ahead, Amy.
I was gonna say anybody can be a leader, but not everybody wants to be a leader.
I agree. Not everybody wants that responsibility, and that's perfectly okay. You can still be a contributing member of the organization without having to be in a management or leadership position. But one thing that I was going to say is that even those people at the lower echelons, I think they can be developed, or I think that people without leadership skills can develop leadership skills. Now, I don't think anybody can be a good leader, because there's some people that are just not going to be able to find a way to effectively influence others and lead others. But could those people be good managers? They very well may be good managers. They may be good managers at a certain level. But remember, the higher you move up in the organization, the more leadership is an aspect of what you do, because you have more of a sphere of influence that you are responsible for. Does anybody disagree with me? Does anybody disagree that anybody, I think that anybody can be a good leader? I did see some head shaking, so. Or did I influence you to change your opinion? Felicia, do you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I'm in agreement with everyone's point of view, and I do think that being a leader is something that is, a lot of people are natural born leaders, and there are some who can be transitioned into leaders, and there are some that just don't want that part of the level. And so I agree with the point that we're all born leaders in any way possible that we can be by setting the example. So I agree with all of that. Myself, I've come from pretty much every position here at SARE, and I'm now in the director position, but I've been in the manager position, the career coach, the job developer, and all of these different levels. And for me, setting the tone as you move up the ladder into these various positions does make a difference, because when you're in a lower position, you are more friends with the coworkers and you're dealing with them on a different level. And then once you get into a role where you're now having to administer duties and hold people accountable, then you start creating a different type of atmosphere. But what I've found that is meeting people where they're at, understanding people and treating them with dignity and respect, and being a part of what the organization represent works better for me. Pounding people over the head does not work. I've done that, tried that, learned from that. But what I've learned is joining people, making it a team, or it's a team effort. And there's no big little you and big me type mentality. It works best. And so those are some of the things that I'm still learning and evolving into the role that I'm in. But, you know, being a leader is setting the tone, leading people down the road to success. And we have a great leadership here, organization. This company's been around a long time. But I can say that leadership, to me, it comes in various levels, as we all have said here. So just to sum it all up, I feel like I'm a good leader, but still learning, wanting to learn, and willing to learn. So that's what I'd like to share.
Well, and I think what you're talking about goes back to that notion of finding that common ground and being able to basically relate to the people that you're responsible for, the people that report to you. Because if you put yourself at a different level and everybody else is underneath you, and you have that mentality, but you have that mentality not as they're underneath you because they have tasks to perform and you're directing them to perform that task, but with the notion that you're better than them because you've been given a title, then people are not going to gravitate towards that. You're not finding common ground that way. But if you're looking at people like, well, look, you have to do these things because this is where you fall in the organization, and I'm going, but I'm the one responsible for making sure that all this happens, because we all succeed if you do perform the tasks that you're supposed to perform. Then that creates more common ground. I mean, basically, what is a good team? A good team are people that are all bought into the same thing, that are trying to do the same thing, that have that common ground, and that common shared sense of achievement, or that common understanding of a vision that everybody wants to achieve. Your bad teams do not have that.
And I also, for me, just holding people accountable versus micromanagement. There's a difference between the two, and how do you differentiate that with the team, because they have to be held accountable. You have goals and measures you need to meet, but then, and that's putting structure in place to do that. But then people tend to look at it as micromanagement, but being able to share the vision of where we're headed and what is needed and what is required is not really micromanagement. It's, this is what we have to do in order to have our jobs, keep our jobs, and stay in business, basically.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. And the definition of micromanagement, I mean, all depends on the on the context of what the organization does. I mean, if I'm building parts to a rocket engine, I need to have some very set, specific processes in place, because there's a very small tolerance for failure, but that could be considered micromanagement. But if I work in a more creative company where the deliverables that we're providing, things that we're doing, are a lot more loosely defined, then I don't necessarily need that same level of management. So I think it really depends on the organization. And I think micromanagement is a term that can mean a lot of different things. But unfortunately, when you use the term management, I think micromanagement is usually equated to that. But also when it comes to management, you have to determine what the right level of management is. So do I need a lot of management? Do I need a little amount of management? And that depends on the organization. But then that also gets back to the notion of leadership, because somebody's got to determine what the what that universe is, what that area is that the company is gonna play in, and what it's trying to do. That it creates that the boundaries within which management is effective. So you have to say that okay, well, if I'm the leader and I have a creative organization, well, I'm going to create the environment, I'm going to create the culture, I'm going to create the vision that is going to have a management structure or people in management that are not going to overmanage. So I think a lot of that depends on context, and it's one point that overarching theme for all of this is that we're defining and we're talking about characteristics, but the definition of whether or not it is good and effective all depends on the context, depends on the organization, depends on what the organization is trying to achieve, and it depends on the space that the organization is operating in order whether or not it's effective. But if you can understand the principles, you can learn more about how the principles are applied, and then take the time to understand what's right for the organization that you're in, because it's different for all of us, and all of our organizations are different. But we just have to get out of the notion of saying there's just one rigidly defined, rigidly structured definition of what constitutes good leadership. Just like when we talk about culture, we'll have some culture topics later on during the year, but you read a book and it says, okay, well, this is what good company culture is. Well, there are a lot of successful companies that would have bad cultures defined as it's defined or as it relates to that definition. So, but they're highly successful. Well, but they do have good cultures. So it's not every company has to have a culture where it's nurturing, or whether everybody gets to make decisions, or you have freedom to do whatever you want to do. Those cultures only work or only effective in certain situations. But there are certain organizations where having a very rigid culture, having a culture where people are fighting against each other, or having a culture where it is all about performance and not necessarily how you're doing things, but it's about what you're doing. Things of that nature, that can still constitute a good culture. I mean, look, I love and I'll bring it up, and I'm sure everybody's seen this movie, but who's seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street? Don't watch it with your kids, but don't watch it with your kids. But if you've seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, you look at that culture, and that culture was highly effective. But that culture was not what you would constitute good culture if you look up, read an article about what constitutes good company culture, or read a book or a definition, or what everybody says good company culture. They were fighting with each other. They were yelling at each other. Somebody would disagree and they basically throw them out. I mean, it was very cutthroat. It was very competitive, but that was a culture that that company needed to be successful. Now, granted, it can be a poor example because they ran the thing into the ground because basically what they were doing was completely and overtly illegal. But at the end of the day, they found success because that was the culture that made them successful. But that goes against the grain for what you would think would be good culture. Now, what they wanted to achieve, I think, the vision, and I think what they wanted to achieve, a lot of that was skewed, but it was skewed based upon the goals of basically going up and making as much money as we can to live the lifestyle that we want to live. And that at the end of the day is not necessarily good or conducive to building a really good, long lasting organization. So they're definitely not a shining example of what a business can be, but definitely an example of how something that goes against the grain for what most people would consider a good company culture can lead to success. So it all depends on the context. All right, I want to go back to a couple of these characteristics that we were talking about. So we got. Go ahead, Amy.
I wanted to add something that I just thought of. I guess in a leadership position, most leaders are well, in a good leadership, they have sincere interest in other people, as opposed to most people that want to be managers. They're looking more at a position of power than just just managing anyways. So I guess as a good leader, you would be less egotistic per se, as opposed to management, more of an egotistic type of thing. Because I think most people, I mean, me having worked at lower positions for other people and seeing people wanting to be managers is more of just wanting to have that power per se.
Well, I think management is the easy power grab, basically. I mean, here you are in a position of responsibility. Here it is, take it. And leadership, I think, is and achieving a position of management. You don't necessarily have to be a good leader, and I think it's the bar to achieve that is lower in a lot of cases. And so you don't necessarily understand the responsibility that you hold. Now, I think that leaders, as you get to the point where you're learning to influence people, and as you get further along with influencing people, I think that you do understand a little bit more of the responsibility that you have. But I think it's a lot harder and it's a lot more difficult to achieve. You don't just wake up one day and you're a great leader. Even if you're a natural born leader, you just don't necessarily wake up one day and say, I'm a great leader. You may have those characteristics, but you have to hone those characteristics over time. But if you're a manager and you've never been in a position of management before, then all of a sudden somebody just hands you a management position. Yeah, I think that can certainly go to your head and cause you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do, and cause you to be a good manager, because you're like, hey, I'm the manager. You have to do what I tell you to do. So go out there and do it. And you know very little about how to really inspire. And I will say, I mean, yeah, I think you do see a lot of egotistical managers, but I think you see a lot of egotistical leaders. I can think of one very big one to start off with that seems to be in the news every day. But there are a lot of egotistical leaders, and sometimes that egotism is part of what makes them successful, because part of what inspires people and influences people is that egotism. And so a lot of people look at it as a negative thing, but it can be a good thing depending on what you're what you're trying to achieve, and again, the context. So we have to think about this a lot within context. But I think you're right, Jaime. I think it's a lot easier for people to get a position of management and be a bad manager, because you don't necessarily have to be as developed to be in a position of management than you do to really get into a position of leadership. Not to say that there are not a lot of bad leaders out there that get promoted for whatever reason, but I think you're right. I think you have that stereotype with managers because a lot of it is true. You do run into a lot of those people like that. So back to the characteristics. So we left off with reactive versus proactive. Next one I'd like to talk about is a manager minimizes risk, a leader takes risk. So let's think about that. A manager is responsible for control of something, control or organization of something. Risk presents a lot of issues with that. So the manager wants to minimize the risk of that process not being followed or that task not being completed. But the leader is creating the vision, and they're creating the direction that they want things to go. And that a lot of times involves taking risk. So managers are much more risk averse. Leaders are much more risk takers. The next one is a manager makes rules and a leader breaks rules. So I think that goes without saying. I mean, how many great leaders or inspirational leaders do we see out there that we would say, are breaking the rules or bending the norm? A manager maintains an existing direction. A leader takes a new direction. So the leader will determine the overall direction that things are going. It's responsibility for the management not to change that direction, but responsibility for management to make sure that direction is followed. Now, next one is a manager values results. Did you follow this process? Did you accomplish this task? Did you accomplish this very specific goal? A leader values achievement. And we had a little debate about this in a roundtable that we did last week is, well, what's the difference between results and achievement? And really the difference that, and this is my opinion, and we can certainly debate this, but that results are very, very, very specific. I achieved a certain task. I performed a certain task. I got through it. I did it. I met a certain goal, a certain very specific goal. I think the definition of achievement, is a lot broader and represents things that are a lot more broad. I mean, think about it from the example of a football team. Well, my result was I ran this play and I scored a touchdown. My achievement is winning the Super Bowl, or achieving whatever we wanted to achieve for the whatever the overall goals were for the team. But I think that the attaining specific results leads to achievement. That results are more of the footsteps on the path towards achievement. So what do we think about that? We agree with it? We disagree with it? I think this is something that's pretty debatable. But what do we feel? Jaime, go.
Well, I was thinking about that earlier as I saw the word goals. I was thinking about like soccer, when you goal, the leader pretty much creates the game, creates the goal, and the manager gets it there. Or, like on a soccer game.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, and I think also, think about it this way, is that the leader develops the field of play and the confines within which the game is going to be played, and what the end result of the game needs to be. And it's the management aspect of actually getting the ball into the goal and achieving the victory. I mean, I know that we can use achievement and results fairly. Those terms can be used in a lot of cases interchangeably. But I think that if you do break it down, what a manager wants to achieve is going to be different than what a leader wants to achieve. And I think you can equate what a manager wants to achieve more to a specific result, as opposed to more of an overarching achievement. Anybody else want to make a comment on that? All right, so everybody agrees with me. I like this group. All right, the next one, and these last few, and this is the reason why they're at the end, are again a little bit more debatable. Let's talk about the next one. And this one, I think people may scratch their heads on, but we'll talk through it and we'll explain it. So a manager is concerned with doing things right. Okay, I'm concerned with following a process the right way. I'm concerned with making sure that you perform your task what is considered right. A leader is concerned with doing the right thing. So what is the right thing? Well, the right thing can be whatever it is that leadership has defined. It needs to be the right thing. Whatever the right thing is to move the organization forward in the direction, achieve the vision. So do we feel that those are two separate things? I think a lot of people can argue it's the same thing. I think a lot of people can argue they're two separate things. Who wants to argue they're the same thing? No dissension amongst the group. I like that. Who thinks that Rand, go, you came off mute. You have something you want to share with it?
Yeah, I understand the distinction, at least in my mind. Concerned with doing things right makes sense from a management perspective because you have processes that are all agreed upon. Everybody is rowing in the same direction based on whatever it is, the results that you're seeking, versus, whether or not you need to pivot because the results that you're creating are not necessarily going to then get you to achieving your goal. Then you need to say, okay, well, yes, we're doing things the right way, but because what we're doing right now isn't the right way or not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to equating this to management and leadership, again, management is much more rigidly defined. Leadership is not. And I think that when you talk about doing things right, I think that can be more rigidly defined than doing things the right way. Doing the right thing, because I think the right thing can mean a lot of different things. And I think the right thing could be in the eye of the beholder. I mean, I think doing things right could be in the eye of the beholder as well. But I think that it can be a lot more rigidly defined than the right thing, because we could talk about amongst this group what we feel is the right thing to do. And we could get many different answers. And it just depends on what our perceptions are of what the right thing is. I mean, you see a lot of highly contentious topics out there in media and in the news. And a lot of people are like, well, we're doing the right thing. We're doing this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But different people, depending on where their views lie, they disagree with that. Well, that's not the right thing. But yeah, you think this is the right thing, but I don't think this is the right thing. But I think that doing things right, I think you could say, okay, well, here's a step by step thing that constitutes doing things right. So I think that gets into the whole notion of the nebulous definition of leadership and the stricter definition of management.
And I think the reason being for what you just said is because the manager has a more specific goal that he's looking at, and he's focused just there mostly. And the leader has a broader aspect or is looking at things in a broader aspect, not just looking at we're going to achieve this, but there's obstacles in the way that we have to be watching for that the manager is not going to be able to see because he's only focused on the goal.
Yeah, and I think it's a function of overall direction versus the things that need to be done to head in that direction and maintain in that direction, or it's the overall achievement versus the short-term goals that need to be achieved or need to be accomplished. I think is a better term to meet those to gain that achievement. So I think you're right. And, management's a much smaller scope. Leadership is a much larger scope. So the last one characteristics I want to share, and this is another one we can debate on, but we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but it is a manager sees people as subordinates. A manager has people that specifically report to them. A leader sees people as followers. And I think you can say subordinates and followers are a term that can be used interchangeably. But the way that I equate this to is that a subordinate is there because they have to be there. Now, you don't necessarily always have to be in a job, but a subordinate is in a position because in the hierarchy, they are in this position. And that's why they're called a subordinate. Followers are convinced to be followers. So you can be a subordinate and not necessarily be a follower. And so, but I think turning someone into a follower requires utilizing that influence that leaders have than just saying, okay, well, I'm in a position over you. You need to do what I say. Do we think there's a difference? Do we think it's the same?
I mean, you can. That almost says a lot about like social influence right now, social media. I mean, their social influence right now, it's more about just having followers, even if you're leading them in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter. And it seems like nowadays, most of social media is leading a lot of people in the wrong direction instead of giving back people something that really helps them or something good for them.
Yeah, and I think
leadership.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this, about the influence of social media and whether that really constitutes a leadership. And I think it can. I think it can. I mean, I think it constitutes influence. I mean, obviously they use the term influencer because you are influencing things. But are you influencing people from a point of leadership, or are you influencing people from a point to just influence people? And so I think that is a I mean, we did argue that, well, it's not really leadership because you're not necessarily creating a vision that you're leading people towards. You're influencing people basically to watch you or to see what you do, or basically buy the stuff that you're peddling, for lack of a better term. But it could constitute leadership because you get back to the definition where we're talking about people in an organization exhibiting leadership qualities by what they do and getting people to follow them. But then going back to the other side of it, well, are social media influencers really influencing people to take a group of people in a direction to achieve something? So I think maybe that achievement aspect goes against the notion that they're really leaders. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you see out there, and there's a lot of stuff that influences people out there, and there is certainly a responsibility for what and how we influence people, and I think that responsibility really gets looked over in the excuse me, in the name of getting people to do something.
This one rubs me the wrong way, Maurice. But I'm a little more of a hippie leader than most. But I think, sees people as followers from a leadership perspective. In my mind, it's just sees people, and that's it. I don't know, or I don't quite understand the need for a leader to have the assumption that their employees or management or whoever it is are followers. I don't quite. You mean following? Yeah, the mission, the vision. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and I think that's. Go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, so no, I understand your differentiation there, Rand. I think how I am processing this and how I thought about having followers is actually developing followership. So I actually think that what it is you are creating an environment with an involved group working towards a common goal where they are organically bought in to following your leadership, which I think within that environment can mean open dialogue, freedom, psychological safety to have a level of dissent that's productive, have a productive tension to maybe position something that's working towards a goal. But I think developing followership versus the mentality of punching a clock and this is my job. It's the followership of reaching the ultimate common goal.
Yeah, and I think that it also goes back to the notion that a lot of things that surround leadership can have a lot of different definitions. And I think your definition of follower can be, it really depends on the context, because I think there you can certainly have a negative connotation to follower. I think you can have a positive connotation to follower. But what I do think a lot of it boils down to is what's the purpose that's trying to be achieved. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you go back to really the definition of leadership, I mean, you're maximizing the efforts of others towards the achievement of a greater good. If people are going to follow the achievement, or if people want to achieve that greater good, they're going to have to follow something in some form or fashion. And so I think following is an aspect of it, but I think, again, I think subordinate has a much more rigid definition, but I think follower has a much looser definition, and thus equates a little bit better to leadership. Rand, what do you think about that?
It makes sense to me. Although my primary goal is to empower the team to become leaders, everybody on the team. We have a smaller organization, so we'll never really get to a place where we'll need, technically that hierarchy. I just can't accept the word follower. It just, egalitarian, we're all the same, we're peers, we're all working towards the same goal. Yeah, just struggling with it.
Yeah, well, and I think that also illustrates the point of the or the notion that different things work for different organizations. I mean, you guys are a much more creative organization. You're a much people have to have a more loosely defined environment in order to really be successful when you're working in a creative organization. But again, if you were manufacturing rocket motors, well, then you do have to have a very, very specific thing, because there's much less tolerance for what you do has much tighter tolerances for success, and much less of a room for failure than it does with other things. So I think that works within the context of your organization, and it's a great thing. I mean, it leads to you being successful. So in some places you have to have a very strict hierarchy, in some places you don't. And like I said, I think you guys being a more creative organization, I think that creates a competitive advantage for you, because of the way that you approach that. So yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that you can define this in a lot of different ways, but
I think Rand has a point there about being level with everybody. I was out here helping the guys work on some cars for about a week or so, and we were real busy, so I just decided to go help them. And somebody walked in, and well, they know I own the place, and they're like, "You're out here working?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I'm helping the guys, but I'm willing to be out there and get down to their level per se, to do whatever it takes and show them that I'm just like them. I can do those things too, just like they can, and I'm willing to help them and teach them to do it better if I can. But I also have to see that they can also teach me how to do things better.
Mhm.
You know, at the same time I'm learning, but I am willing to, I guess you could say, go to war with them per se. You know, I'm not just going to throw them out there and say, you know, go to war and go die by yourself. I'm going to go with you.
Yeah, and I think that maybe a better use of the term follow is that because of that, they want to follow you in a certain direction. So you don't necessarily see them as followers, but they want to follow you in a certain direction. Because I agree with you, Rand. I mean, I don't see anybody that works for us as followers. And I don't want to brand them as followers. I mean, we do have a hierarchy in place of people that report to other people, but I don't necessarily consider them as followers in the sense of the term. I consider them as following in a shared direction that's been defined.
And just, Maurice, if I can jump in for 2 seconds, I think Danielle touched on a really important thing that I didn't hear us talk about yet, which is healthy tension and creating the space. We always refer to it, at least our coach helps us to refer to it as creating a safe space, but not a comfortable space. Celebrating failures, having people being able to challenge one another in a healthy way. And I think really great leaders create an environment for that.
Yeah, I think so too. And, part of what we all deal with in very volatile markets is we deal with a lot of change. We deal with a lot of challenges. We deal with a lot of new things that we haven't necessarily seen before. And the most dynamic organizations that are working in the most dynamic markets or the most dynamic spaces, they're going to have that type of that type of culture, that type of environment where people can be challenged, people can understand failures, and people can learn from them. Because let's face it, smaller organizations, that's one of our biggest advantages, is that we can pivot very quickly. And we have to have, in order for us to be successful, our leaders have to create environments where we can do that, and that's acceptable. So that cannot be very rigidly defined. And again, that goes back to leadership. One point that I do want to hit on is something as we're getting towards some final points, but I wanted to make sure that this was covered, is that we talked a little bit earlier about effective leadership throughout the organization. So I'm an effective leader, I'm inspiring, but how does that sphere of influence get all the way down to the lower levels of the organization? And I think we have to look at this as if you look at it from the point of view of a manager delegates authority to perform a task. A manager delegates tasks. What does a leader delegate? A leader delegates influence. And what the leader does is the leader influences the next tier to influence the next tier, and so on and so forth. So the leader, by delegating that influence, gets that gets the what achievement of the greater good is, the direction, the vision, gets that through to the lower echelons of the organization. So the more leadership positions that we're in, the more we need to be able to delegate the influence of others to inspire as we have inspired them. And so that's one of the things. And we had someone that came into one of these a few weeks ago, and they said, well, if I want to know how effective a leader I am, I just walk through my shop. He owns a company that manufactures oil rigs, and I just walk through my shop. And if my people are motivated and they're working and they're bought in, well, then I'm doing a good job as a leader, because they are inspired to follow the direction that I want them to follow. If they're not bought in and they're not motivated and they're sitting around playing on their phones, well, then I'm not doing a good enough job delegating that influence down to the lowest levels of the organization. So I think we always can test ourselves by looking at different people at different levels in our organization and seeing how inspired they are to follow the vision and to follow the path that we as leaders have defined.